The sun had nearly vanished behind the rim of the dry hills, bleeding soft fire across the plains. Dust hung like ghosts in the air, stirred by the slow, dragging steps of a woman whose bare feet were cracked and bleeding. Her dress was torn at the hem, stained with days of travel and years of grief. 4 small girls followed her, silent as shadows, their little hands tangled in the fabric of her skirt, clinging not out of fear but habit. The youngest, no more than 3, carried a doll made of straw and old shirt buttons. One of its arms was missing, and its face had rubbed away. The woman's name, no longer spoken by anyone with love, rested heavy on her back. A widow, they had called her since her husband's body was pulled from the mine, limp, soot-covered, and pitiful. They had stopped using her first name soon after. Now she was just a burden. A mouth to feed. Worse still, a cursed one. One who had given birth not to strong sons but 4 girls, and with each birth, her husband's family grew colder, their stares sharper. Daughters, they said, were God's way of reminding a woman she had no worth. She had stayed for too long. For warmth in winter, for food and bellies too small to survive on dreams, for the tiny thread of something like stability. But last night, when her eldest asked for bread and there was none, and the mother-in-law raised a hand to silence her whining, only she didn't strike the child. She struck the widow instead. Again. And again. Until the girls screamed and the youngest wet herself in terror. That night, when the stars were still frozen high above, the widow packed nothing and walked out with only her daughters and a straw doll. Now the prairie stretched before them like an empty promise. The wind whispered prayers no one had taught them. Her arms ached, her lips cracked. The baby began to cry, not loud, just a small whimper like a wounded animal, and she bent low to lift her, swaying under the weight. Then, far off, the faint crunch of wheels on dirt. A wagon crested the hill like something born from the last scrap of hope. Slow. Careful. Pulled by a tired black mare. The man driving it wore no expression, only dust and the sun's orange light painting the lines on his weathered face. He looked like the land itself, quiet, solid, forgotten. The widow stopped walking. He did not call out. Did not wave. Just let the reins slacken as the wagon rolled to a hush not 10 yards from her. She looked at him. He looked at her. And saw it. The bruises were not fresh, not all of them. Some had faded into yellow maps across her cheekbone. One eye was slightly swollen, the lip cracked at the edge. But it was not the wounds that caught him, it was the way she stood anyway. Protective. Barefoot. Tall in the way only women who've survived every kind of weather can be. His eyes dropped to the children. Each one thinner than she should be. One had a cut on her arm, clumsily wrapped in cloth. They didn't hide behind their mother. They just stared back at him with quietness that didn't belong to children. He set the brake. Climbed down. Still, no one spoke. Then he stepped forward, only a few paces. Enough to see the truth of them more clearly. She didn't flinch, though she did shift her daughter higher on her hip. The wind picked up. He cleared his throat, not to speak, but to gather something stuck in his soul. When his voice came, it was low, as if borrowed from the earth. You're coming with me. No question. No threat. Just fact. The widow blinked once. Not in fear. In disbelief. She glanced back at the trail behind her, which held nothing but dust and memory. Then forward again. At the man. At the horse. At the wooden cart that smelled faintly of oats and worn leather. Where? The words sounded strange coming from her. Like it hadn't been used in years. He gestured over his shoulder, not much more than a flick of the hand. To where the roof don't leak. Her throat worked like it wanted to cry, but couldn't remember how. The girls looked up at her, their small eyes searching for the next step, always the next step. She looked down at them, then back at the man. And nodded. They rode in silence, the 5 of them in the back, pressed together beneath a wool blanket that smelled of hay and something like tobacco. The youngest fell asleep first, face buried in her mother's arm. The others followed, one by one, lulled by the steady rhythm of hooves and the gentle rocking of something that finally moved without violence. The widow did not sleep. She stared out at the dusk, watching it deepen. Her thoughts drifted to the house she'd fled, her husband's family sitting around a fire that would burn without her. Their angry mouths full of bitter words about the girl who ran off like a stray. The man didn't speak again, but once he glanced over his shoulder. She didn't know what to make of his eyes. They weren't kind, not in the way soft people were kind. They were just honest. Steady. Like he'd seen storms worse than hers. The wagon turned off the main path, heading toward a low valley dotted with bare trees. The ground softened beneath them. A flicker of something warm lit in the distance. A lamp in a window. She didn't ask if it was his home. She just watched the glow and felt something in her chest loosen. By the time the wagon stopped, night had fallen. The man stepped down first, held out a hand. She hesitated only a second before placing her calloused palm in his. He helped the girls down gently, one by one. When he took the last child in his arms and she didn't flinch, the widow looked away quickly. He opened the door. Inside was nothing grand. A table. 2 chairs. A stove with embers glowing. A worn quilt folded on the floor. It didn't smell of perfume or supper. It smelled of wood and dust and a man who didn't waste words. "You can stay here." She nodded again. Her voice gone. He turned away and said nothing more. But before he stepped out into the cold again, he paused. "Next time someone lifts a hand to you," he looked at her, eyes dark, "make sure it's the last thing they ever raise." And with that, he stepped into the dark, leaving her with 4 sleeping daughters and a single lamp burning in the silence. The house sat low to the ground, as though it didn't trust the sky. Weathered boards, half a porch rail missing, and a tin roof that clicked with the wind. But it stood, solid and unbothered, in a pocket of cottonwoods near a winding creek that whispered instead of flowed. It had no garden, no white fence, no flowers. Just stillness. The kind that settles over time like dust in corners no one bothers to sweep. The widow stepped inside with care, the way one might enter a stranger's dream. She held the baby tight and guided the other girls with soft touches, like a ghost shepherding other ghosts. Inside, the scent of old wood, ashes, and lye soap pressed against her nose. A kettle hung over cold coals. A single bed in the corner, blankets folded tight. One Bible closed. A rifle above the door like punctuation. The man didn't follow them in at first. He lingered outside, as if letting the house breathe new air before filling it with himself again. When he finally stepped in, he said nothing, just struck a match, lit the lamp, and filled the room with warm amber light that softened the shadows clinging to the widow's face. "You'll sleep there," he said, pointing to a patch of clean floor where a pallet had already been laid. He had placed a thick quilt beside it, and a tin cup with water. She nodded, too tired to speak, too grateful to question. The girls settled quickly, children that had learned how to sleep anywhere. One by one, they curled into each other like a single trembling animal. The widow stood for a long while watching them, hand on the youngest's back, rising and falling with her breaths. "You hungry?" The man's voice was flat but not cold. He didn't ask like a neighbor. More like someone offering his portion without needing thanks. She shook her head no, though her stomach had long forgotten how to feel. He ate bread and beans in silence. One plate. One chair. One man's life carved into habit. The fire cracked once, then went still again. She sat on the floor, knees drawn up, arms around her legs, watching him from behind a wall she didn't know how to name. Her eyes searched for something, not safety, not yet. Just signs. Was he kind? Was he cruel when drunk? Did he raise his voice? Would he stare at her girls too long? He didn't look at her. Didn't ask her name. Didn't ask where she'd come from or why the bruise on her jaw had the shape of a boot heel. He said only one thing more that night. "I don't lock the door. Come and go as you please." And then he disappeared behind a curtain and left her with the silence. Morning brought light and the low sounds of livestock, the kind of quiet life that keeps moving even when hearts are broken. She rose before the girls, stirred the coals to life, found water to boil. There was flour and lard in a tin. She made flat bread with shaking hands, half from hunger, half from the memory of what it was to be useful. He came in from the barn with hay in his hair and mud on his boots. He paused when he saw her at the stove. She expected reproach, maybe a harsh word about not needing a maid. Instead, he said, "You didn't have to." Her voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "I wanted to." He didn't answer, but he sat down, ate slowly, said nothing. But when he stood to leave again, he glanced once at the girls, now sitting on the floor in a row like sparrows on a branch, and he gave the smallest nod. Almost like thanks. The days passed like that. Quiet. Unhurried. He never asked why she was there. She never offered. But little things began to change. He cleared space on a shelf for her things, though she had none. He brought in a small stool for the girls to sit while they peeled potatoes. He nailed loose boards on the porch while they watched through the window, eyes wide. One day he returned from town with a new pair of shoes for the eldest girl, worn, but strong. No note, no comment. Just set them by the fire like they'd always belong. And still he never touched her. Not once. She waited for it. Expected it. Men always came wanting something, even the kind ones. But he only said, "Take your time. There ain't no clock ticking here." And somehow that was worse. Because kindness, true, unspoken kindness, was the hardest thing to accept. Especially when it expected nothing in return. One evening, after the girls had fallen asleep and she sat sewing a torn sleeve in the lamp glow, she asked without looking up, "Why'd you stop for me?" He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the dark. "Because my sister died the same way you were headed." She looked up, needle paused mid-stitch. "She bled in a room just like yours. For birthing daughters. 5 of 'em. Her man said God was punishing him." "And where's he now?" The man didn't blink. 6 feet down and cold. "I put him there." The room went still. The fire hissed. The girls shifted in their sleep. She didn't ask anything else. And he didn't offer more. But the next morning, there were wildflowers in a chipped cup by the window. Purple and yellow, gathered in rough hands and left without a word. She didn't touch them. Not yet. That night, as the wind brushed the shutters and the fire burned low, she found herself staring not at the flames, but at the place where he always stood, just outside the light, just inside the silence. There was a steadiness to him that made her tremble more than rage ever had. She lay down beside her daughters and pulled the quilt over them. Sleep came in pieces. But when she did finally drift, it was to the sound of boots pacing the porch, not pacing in frustration, but standing watch. As if the house, old and quiet as it was, now had something worth guarding. She didn't see the figure on horseback that paused at the edge of the trees, watching the house from a shadowed ridge. But the man did. And he did not go inside that night. Rain fell in a steady hush, tapping gently on the tin roof like fingers drumming memories. Inside, the house glowed amber and low, the fire slow and breathing, the air thick with the scent of stew and damp wood. The girls played near the hearth, using buttons and sticks to build stories only children understood, their laughter hushed, as if they feared joy might be a sin in a place so quiet. She sat at the table with a needle in hand, stitching a worn sleeve. Her fingers worked out of instinct, not purpose, each loop tugging a little more silence into the room. Across from her, he sanded a block of wood smooth, carving edges off something he hadn't named yet. Their words had been few that day. Fewer still the day before. But it wasn't emptiness between them, it was something being built slowly, plank by invisible plank. Her voice broke the stillness, soft as a crack in ice. "They said I was unlucky? That I bore what no man should raise?" He didn't look up. "Who said that?" His tone wasn't gentle. It was solid. Anchored. Like he already knew. His mother. His brothers. The pastor. She paused, fingers faltering over the thread. Even he didn't say it, not outright. But he looked at me like I'd failed him. Every time they were born, he'd disappear for longer. First 2 days. Then 5. Then a week. The fire popped quietly, like it winced at her words. He still didn't look at her, but she felt the change in the air, like something had leaned forward to listen more closely. Did you love him? Her breath caught. I wanted to. She let the words sit there, raw and real. I think I tried so hard to be what he wanted, I stopped knowing who I was. And by the time I realized, he'd stopped trying altogether. I was just someone who cooked and bled and delivered him daughters he didn't want to hold. Her hands fell to her lap. The girls, they never asked what he was to them. He never touched them unless someone was watching. Never told them stories. Never once called them beautiful. She looked up at him now. Do you know how small a child has to feel to stop calling their father Papa? He met her gaze for the first time. I know. The 2 words carried weight, not sympathy but lived truth. He reached for his coffee, held it in both hands as if to warm something far deeper than fingers. My sister had 6 girls before her husband left. She still kept setting a place at the table for him. Said maybe if the Lord saw her hope, he'd give her a son next time. And did he? He nodded slowly. Stillborn. A long pause passed, not uncomfortable, but reverent. Like 2 people had bowed their heads at the same invisible altar. The rain thickened outside. One of the girls, the youngest, toddled over and climbed into her lap, curling like a kitten against her chest. The mother folded her arms around the little body, closing her eyes. A strand of hair clung to her cheek where tears might have been if she had any left. He stood and brought over a blanket, draped it around them both without a word. She held it tight, voice muffled. Do you ever think it's the world that's cursed, not us? Every damn day. His answer was quick, almost a growl. Not angry with her. Angry with the world that made her ask the question in the first place. She exhaled something close to a laugh, small, unsure. You don't talk much. He gave a faint shrug. Words feel cheap unless you mean them. What do you mean? He thought about that, walking slowly to the window, watching rain run like veins down the glass. That kindness shouldn't be a reward. That no child should have to earn it. And that you, he turned toward her, deserve to be looked at like you matter. Not tolerated. Not blamed. Seen. Her throat tightened. Seen? He nodded once, as though it was simple. I see you. Silence fell again, but this time it wrapped around them like a quilt, warm, certain, unafraid. That night, after the girls were tucked beneath hand-stitched quilts, and the fire dimmed to glowing coals, she stayed up to mend a torn apron. He watched from the doorway, arms folded, saying nothing. When she looked up, he stepped closer. What do you see when you look at me? Her voice trembled, not with fear but the ache of being close to something good, unsure if she was allowed to touch it. He knelt beside her, slowly, deliberately, resting one hand on the table edge, not touching her, just near. I see a woman who held 4 lives in her body and kept them alive with nothing but grit and grace. I see a mother who'd starve before letting her children go cold. I see bruises that didn't break you. I see someone strong enough to walk away from hell barefoot with babies in tow, and soft enough to still sing lullabies. She didn't cry. She couldn't. But her eyes glistened. And what do you want? He hesitated. When he answered, his voice dropped lower, barely more than breath. I want you to stop looking over your shoulder like you'll be dragged back. I want your girls to believe the world can be kind. I want peace for all of you, even if I don't get to be part of it. She reached out and laid her fingers atop his, barely a touch, as if testing whether the warmth was real. You already are. For a long time neither moved. The wind rattled the window just once. Somewhere outside, the creek gurgled beneath the rain. The moment hung suspended like dew, fragile, trembling, golden. He stood, not pulling his hand away but letting hers fall when it needed to. I built a bed today. For the girls. They'll sleep better off the floor. She smiled gently, eyes bright with something that looked almost like hope. Thank you? He paused at the door, backlit by the fire's glow. You ever feel like staying, for good, you just say the word. She watched him walk away, his boots soft against the floor, his shadow stretching long behind him. She turned to the apron, picked up the thread, but her fingers trembled now in a different way. And she didn't notice the muddy hoofprints just outside the window, or the bent blade of grass, still slick with rain, where someone had stood too long beneath the trees. Snow fell soft as breath, blanketing the valley in stillness. The world looked gentler under white, fences half buried, branches dressed in lace, rooftops bowed in silence. Inside the house, the wood stove crackled low, casting sleepy shadows that curled across the floor. The girls sat cross-legged beneath the window, tracing frost with their fingers. One shaped a sun, another wrote her name backward with a fingertip too cold to feel. The widow stood at the stove, stirring a pot of root stew. Her belly growled quietly, but her eyes flicked to the girls, to the way their skin no longer looked stretched thin. Their hair was shinier now, their cheeks less hollow. Little things. Quiet things. Proof that a home doesn't declare itself, it just grows like moss along the cracks. Behind her, he came in from the barn, boots thick with snow, hands red from the cold. He stomped gently, not to be loud but to shake off the chill without waking the peace. She handed him a tin mug without a word, and he accepted it like it was more than warmth. Like it meant something. "Town's talkin' again," he said. She stilled, ladle halfway to the pot. "What about? That your husband's brother's coming. Says he's got claim to the girls." "To you?" Her knuckles whitened around the ladle. She set it down, turned slowly. "He doesn't have claim to anything but the dust he crawled from. He says different. Says you ran with his kin? That he aims to get you back." Her mouth twisted, not fear, not quite. Something older. Resignation, maybe? Or rage too old to flare. "He used to tell me my girls were weeds. Said they'd grow wild, nothing but trouble. His father called them blanks. Said a real woman makes sons. Said I was empty inside." She reached for a towel, wiped her hands too hard. "And now he wants to own them? Own me?" The man watched her, eyes quiet. "You don't have to run again. I won't let him take them. You won't have to." She blinked. "You'd stand in front of him? Without hesitation? Even if the law backs him?" His jaw clenched. "The law don't raise children. It don't hold them when they're sick or scared. It don't patch their dresses or teach them how to sleep through thunder. If he wants to drag you through court, he can try. But if he thinks he can take you by force, he'll have to go through me." The room felt suddenly fuller. Like every unsaid word in her heart had finally found shape in his voice. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of his breath. "And what if I stay? What if we never leave this house again?" His eyes searched hers. "Then I'd spend every day making sure you never forget what peace feels like." Her fingers brushed his. "And what if I wanted more than peace?" He swallowed. "Once. Loud in the quiet. I'd never take a thing you didn't offer. What if I did offer?" His hand rose slowly, then stopped in the air between them, an invitation, not a claim. Her fingers met his halfway. Their touch was small. Gentle. A whisper of a promise either had words for yet. No kiss followed. No embrace. Just warmth between palms, as snow whispered outside like a hush over the world. Then the knock came. 3 short raps. Then silence. She froze. He turned. His hand dropped. The girl stood, eyes wide. Another knock. Firmer. Slower. He crossed the room and lifted the rifle from its place above the door. She stepped forward quickly. "Let me." He stared at her. "You sure?" She nodded. Her hands trembled, but her spine did not. She opened the door. A woman stood there. Not her mother-in-law. Not her sister. A stranger, though the face was familiar in the way old pain can be. Dark dress. Pale lips. Gray streaks in her braid. A basket on her arm, full of cloth and dried berries. "Sorry to intrude," the woman said softly. I heard you were here. I just wanted to see for myself. See what? The widow's voice was calm. Tired but not weak. That you were alive. That you and the girls made it. The woman stepped forward slightly, holding the basket out like an offering. I used to live near your husband's folk. I heard what they did. What they said. I couldn't stop thinking about it. She took a breath. I had 3 girls. Lost 2 to fever. My husband left me after the second. Said God was punishing him. She looked up, eyes rimmed red. You're not cursed. You're blessed. 4 girls? That's a kingdom. That's a hymn. The widow's mouth opened, but no words came. The stranger placed the basket gently on the porch. You don't have to forgive them. But don't ever believe them. She turned, walked back through the snow. No horse. Just feet crunching quietly toward the ridge. The man came to the door, looked after her. You know her? No. She knew you. She didn't reply. She stepped outside, knelt beside the basket. Lifted the cloth to reveal small mittens, hand-stitched and size for each daughter. A note tucked inside read simply, They don't need brothers to be brave. Her breath caught. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her palm, stood slowly, turned toward the door. Inside, her daughters stood watching. All 4. And just behind them, he waited. That night she pulled her quilt higher, curling around the youngest. But sleep didn't come. Her heart thudded slow and full, thick with questions. The kind that didn't have answers. Only time. Sometime before dawn, she rose and moved to the kitchen. In the dark, she poured water, drank, and stared out the window. In the distance, at the tree line, something shifted. A figure on horseback. Watching. And this time, it didn't ride away. The stars had vanished behind a ceiling of dark, brooding clouds, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Rain was coming. Not the soft kind that kissed the earth, but the kind that cleansed what had gone rotten. Marin stood at the doorway of the small barn, her shawl clutched tight around her shoulders. The wind tugged at her hair, wild now, unbraided, like a flag risen in defiance. Behind her, the girls slept on their bedrolls, huddled together beneath the old quilt Jack had found, the one with tiny horses stitched into the corners. The silence in the house had changed. It no longer hovered like a question but settled like an answer. He hadn't said anything after touching her face that night. Just a look, soft as wet earth after rain. Since then, he had watched her in that quiet way, not as if waiting for something, but simply being present. As if that alone was the offering. But peace, like everything in Marin's life, never lasted long. They came at night. With stomping boots and lanterns swinging like curses in the dark. Marin saw the glint of her brother-in-law's belt buckle first, catching the moonlight as he stepped forward from the gloom. Seth. Still proud, still mean. Behind him, 2 of his cousins, the ones who'd always laughed when her girls cried. You thought you could run? Seth spat into the dirt. Thought some ranch rat could keep what belongs to us? The word belongs sliced deeper than any slap ever had. Her girls, their futures, were not cattle to be rounded up and branded. But to these men, they were leverage. Mouths to silence. Bodies to sell if needed. Shame to bury. Jack stepped out from the shadows beside her. His coat was open, revealing the rifle he carried not for show but for storms like this. She doesn't belong to anyone, he said, voice steady. And neither do those girls. Seth's lips curled. You think you scare me, Calbo? I've put down bulls bigger than you. Jack didn't flinch. He didn't raise the rifle either. Just kept his gaze steady, calm. That, somehow, made the moment heavier than if he'd shouted. Marin felt something shift inside her, a brittle wall that had held for too long cracking open. You beat me for birthing daughters, she said, her voice rising, not loud but clear as dawn. You left bruises on my children and called it correction. You took everything my husband tried to leave us and then spat on his grave. The men exchanged glances. They hadn't expected her to speak. I gave you 10 years, she whispered. You'll get no more. Seth moved first, hand dropping to the pistol at his hip, but Jack was faster. One warning shot cracked the air and startled the horses in the corral. The bullet landed a foot from Seth's boots, kicking up dirt and fury. I don't miss twice, Jack said. Rain began to fall, slow, then quicker, until it was a rhythm on the barn roof. The girls stirred inside, small silhouettes blinking in the doorway, watching their mother not tremble. You come again, Jack added, and I'll make sure you don't walk home. Seth backed up, breath hissing through his teeth, but something in Jack's stillness told him the line had been drawn in blood, not dust. The men retreated, shadows swallowed by the storm. Marin stood rooted in the mud, rain soaking through her shawl, through her bones, until Jack touched her elbow. They won't come again, he said gently. But Marin shook her head. They'll always come. He nodded once, as if agreeing not with her fear but with her truth. Then we'll always stand. The days that followed were a strange kind of spring. The girls began to laugh again, not loudly, not all at once, but like saplings reaching towards something warm. Jack taught them how to chop kindling, how to mend fences, how to braid rope and not fear their own strength. Marin watched him from the porch some evenings, the way he crouched beside her youngest to show her how to tie knots, patient as if he had all the time in the world. He never asked for thanks. Never asked for more. And that was the trouble. Because Marin had known men who took. Who claimed and then blamed. Jack was not one of them. Which made the offering of herself all the harder, for it would be hers to give, not his to demand. One afternoon, as the sun stretched long over the ridge, Marin found Jack fixing the gate. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, arms flecked with dust and effort. You never asked me, she said quietly. He paused, looked up. Asked what? To stay, she replied. To be yours. He leaned against the fence, brow furrowed in thought. Then, with the ghost of a smile, said, Didn't have to. Marin's throat caught. Why? Because you're already here, he said. And not once have I seen you look for the road out. Silence bloomed between them, not empty, but full of things finally said. She stepped forward, took his hand. Rough from work, warm with life. If I stay, she said slowly, I don't want to be pitted. Or protected like a porcelain thing. He shook his head. I've seen you carry more than most men could bear. Pity isn't even in the room. She smiled then. Not the practiced, polite one she'd worn like armor, but a smile from the marrow of her. And Jack, who'd watched skies and cattle in silence for years, watched her. That night she braided her hair slow. Not for show, not for tradition, but for peace. The girls slept early. The wind outside was calm. And in the hush of their home, two hands found each other beneath the lantern's glow. The world had taken so much from Marin. But here, in this quiet place carved out of grief and grit, love had not come like thunder. It had arrived like dawn, gentle, inevitable, and golden. And somewhere deep inside her, for the first time in years, something whispered, I am not afraid anymore.